Before we get into this, let me ask you something a little uncomfortable. Have you ever run into someone after years apart and thought, how did they get like this? This strong, this calm, this different? Not because they suddenly looked younger, not because they became famous or successful in some obvious way, but because something about the way they carried themselves had shifted, like life had thrown everything it had at them and somehow failed to break them. Pain and hardship do not always diminish a person. Sometimes they create wisdom, emotional depth, self-respect, and quiet confidence. As people age, they may stop chasing validation, accept themselves more fully, and develop a calmer, stronger presence. True growth transforms suffering into understanding, making someone more grounded, purposeful, and magnetic from the inside out. There's a real difference between looking young and actually feeling alive. Someone can preserve every youthful feature and still seem completely worn out emotionally. Someone else might show plenty of visible signs of age while radiating real vitality. That vitality usually connects back to curiosity, purpose, resilience, and emotional flexibility. As long as those stay active, age alone doesn't automatically produce decline. A lot of the fear around aging actually comes from clinging to earlier versions of ourselves, wanting to stay who we used to be, because change can feel threatening. But real growth requires leaving certain identities behind. The person who enters a later chapter of life with more wisdom is rarely identical to who they were years earlier. Certain parts of them fade out, new parts emerge. That process can feel uncomfortable, but it's exactly what makes transformation possible. There are also people who become more physically attractive as they get older, purely because their internal world has shifted. Calm softens someone's expression. Self-acceptance changes posture. Lower anxiety changes presence entirely. Genuine acceptance creates ease. None of these are cosmetic changes in the traditional sense, and yet they completely alter how other people perceive someone. The person appears grounded. Their face tells a story, not just about years lived, but about years actually understood. The strength that comes with age is a different animal than the strength associated with youth. Younger strength usually depends on speed, ambition, or visible achievement. Mature strength tends to come from endurance instead. It develops through surviving genuine uncertainty without losing yourself completely in the process. It's quieter. It rarely needs an audience. The person isn't simply racking up years, they're racking up perspective. And perspective changes how pain gets carried, how relationships get valued, and how life itself gets understood. What tends to surprise people isn't just that someone got older. It's that they got steadier, clearer, more at peace along the way. People are often shocked by transformation because, without even realizing it, they assume the version of you they once knew is supposed to stay fixed forever. Human beings form these quiet, unspoken expectations about other people. If someone was insecure back then, we expect insecurity to keep following them. If someone struggled, we expect struggle to eventually become their whole identity. If someone once seemed overlooked, underestimated, anxious, or uncertain, others might mistake those traits for permanent truths rather than a temporary chapter. That's part of why transformation catches people off guard. They're not actually comparing who you are now to reality. They're comparing who you've become to a snapshot they've been carrying around in their memory for years. Most people only ever witness fragments of someone else's life. They see behavior, appearance, achievements, setbacks, but they rarely see the internal battles underneath. They don't witness the sleepless nights spent questioning everything. They don't see the private grief, the quiet loneliness, the repeated disappointments, the long stretches of slow rebuilding. And yet, those hidden experiences are usually exactly where the deepest change comes from, Real transformation tends to happen quietly. It almost never announces itself while it's actually happening. Someone might spend years learning to trust themselves after living with constant self-doubt. Someone else might slowly let go of their need for approval after years of trying to meet other people's expectations. Someone might grow emotionally stronger after surviving pain that nearly took them under. These shifts unfold gradually and often go unnoticed because inner growth doesn't always produce visible results right away. Then, one day, people encounter the transformed version of you, and something just feels different. Maybe your appearance changed. Maybe your energy changed. Maybe you speak with more certainty now, or carry yourself with more ease. Sometimes that transformation shows up as confidence. Other times, it shows up as silence. Someone who no longer feels the need to defend themselves often reads completely differently to the people who remember their earlier struggles. That contrast creates surprise, because transformation challenges people's assumptions. When someone grows beyond what was expected of them, the people around them are forced to rethink what they believed, and sometimes uncomfortably, to rethink what they believe about themselves too. Watching someone else's growth can be genuinely unsettling because it exposes possibilities that other people never pursued in their own lives. There's another reason transformation shocks people so deeply. Most of us are taught to expect pain to permanently damage a person. Society tends to assume suffering only leaves behind wreckage, but suffering can just as easily produce depth, resilience, wisdom, unexpected strength. People are caught off guard when someone who's been through real loss ends up more peaceful instead of more bitter, or when someone who's faced repeated rejection ends up more secure instead of more fearful. The expectation was collapse. What actually happened was growth. That contradiction is exactly what grabs people's attention. Transformation also changes someone's energy in ways that are hard to explain with logic alone. Humans respond to subtle cues, posture, expression, emotional steadiness, eye contact, tone of voice. Someone who once seemed unsure of themselves might later come across as completely grounded. Someone who once chased acceptance might later seem entirely self-sufficient. These shifts change how a person is perceived almost instantly. Others might say something like, "You just seem different," without being able to name exactly what changed. Often, what actually shifted wasn't the person's core personality at all. It was that fear quietly disappeared, insecurity softened, and something steadier took its place. People can be especially thrown off when transformation happens without any public recognition attached to it. Society tends to associate growth with visible milestones, success, wealth, status, appearance. But some of the most significant transformations happen entirely on the inside. A person learns peace, learns boundaries, learns acceptance, learns to stop abandoning themselves. None of that comes with applause, and yet it completely reshapes identity. What's interesting is that people going through this kind of change often underestimate how visible it actually is to others. They've grown so used to their own gradual evolution, living through every difficult stage one at a time, that the change feels slow from the inside. But to someone who remembers an earlier version of you, the shift can look almost dramatic. Years of reflection can look sudden to an outside observer. Years of healing can seem mysterious. Years of struggle can end up looking like effortless confidence. People end up shocked, not because transformation is impossible, but because they underestimated what time, pain, awareness, and persistence can actually build inside another human being. The person standing in front of them no longer fits the box they'd unconsciously assigned, and in that moment, something uncomfortable becomes clear. The identities we assign to other people are almost always smaller than who those people eventually grow into. Silence, pain, and struggle tend to reshape a person in ways that stay completely invisible while it's happening. Most deep transformation doesn't occur during celebration or comfort. It happens during the periods when someone feels isolated, uncertain, disappointed, or forced to face parts of themselves they've been avoiding for years. From the outside, it might just look like stillness. On the inside, something intense is unfolding. Silence has a strange effect on people, mostly because it strips away distraction. A lot of us spend years surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, routines, social validation, constant activity. And all of that noise can prevent real self-examination. When silence finally enters a life, whether through loneliness, loss, distance, or simply choosing to withdraw, a person often starts hearing thoughts they'd been ignoring for a long time. At first, that can feel deeply uncomfortable. Silence tends to surface fear, regret, insecurity, unresolved wounds. Someone might realize they built their whole identity around pleasing other people. They might discover how much of their behavior was actually driven by fear of rejection. They might notice the same pattern repeating itself across relationships, ambitions, decisions. None of these realizations feel good, because they challenge the familiar version of ourselves we've grown attached to. But silence can also become the place where real honesty finally starts. Without constant distraction pulling at them, people sometimes finally meet who they actually are, instead of the performance they've been putting on. Pain tends to deepen this whole process even further. Pain interrupts certainty. It shatters assumptions about life, relationships, and how much control we actually have. Someone who's been betrayed might rethink trust entirely. Someone who's lost something important might completely reorder their priorities. Failure has a way of exposing unrealistic expectations. Repeated disappointment tends to force real reflection. Pain usually gets viewed purely as damage, but it also reshapes perception. People who've genuinely suffered often become more aware of just how fragile everyone is, themselves included. That awareness can grow into compassion. Someone who used to judge quickly might learn to understand instead. Someone who used to value appearances above everything might start appreciating authenticity instead. Struggle redirects attention toward what actually matters once comfort is stripped away. Not everyone processes pain the same way, of course. Some people harden, grow defensive, turn bitter. Others slowly transform that same suffering into wisdom. Usually the difference comes down to whether pain gets resisted endlessly or actually examined honestly. Struggle adds its own layer to all of this. Long-term struggle teaches things that quick success simply can't. Repeated effort without a guaranteed payoff builds real endurance. Surviving uncertainty builds patience. Facing the same obstacles over and over tends to reduce fear over time because the person realizes they can keep going even without knowing how things will turn out. People often admire confidence without stopping to ask where it actually came from. Certain kinds of confidence don't come from praise or achievement at all. They come from survival. The person knows deep down that they made it through situations they once thought were impossible to survive. That memory changes how they respond to future challenges. The challenges themselves don't necessarily get easier, but the panic fades. Identity stops depending on everything going perfectly. Over time, silence, pain, and struggle quietly reshape how someone carries themselves. The changes can be subtle. They speak differently because they no longer feel pressure to prove everything about themselves in every conversation. They listen more because experience has taught them how complicated most situations really are. They become more selective about where they spend their energy because hardship has shown them what actually deserves it. Their emotional reactions might soften, not out of indifference, but because they've gained real perspective. Other people often read these shifts as maturity, calm, or unusual strength. What they rarely see are the private moments that actually built those qualities. The nights spent questioning direction, the disappointments absorbed in silence, the loneliness endured without a single witness, the repeated attempts made after failure. Transformation built through struggle rarely comes with dramatic recognition because so much of it happens entirely internally, but eventually its effects become visible anyway. The person seems more grounded, more patient, less driven by outside approval, more capable of staying steady when things get uncertain. There's also a particular kind of depth that comes from real suffering, one that's genuinely hard to fake. People who've honestly confronted themselves tend to carry less illusion. They understand weakness because they've met their own. They recognize fear because they've lived through it firsthand. That understanding often produces humility, and humility born from struggle is nothing like insecurity. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's understanding that strength and vulnerability can exist in the same person at the same time. None of this means silence, pain, and struggle automatically improve a person. Sometimes they just wound, deeply, and without any silver lining. But when someone faces these experiences consciously, they can reshape identity in genuinely profound ways. The resulting changes often get misunderstood because observers only see the calmer surface. The difficult years that actually built it stay completely hidden underneath. A lot of people think of youth as something that belongs entirely to the body. Smooth skin, physical energy, speed, appearance. Because of that assumption, aging gets treated almost like proof that youth is disappearing. But some people grow older and still feel unusually alive. Their curiosity stays active. Their presence still carries real energy. They keep learning, creating, questioning, chasing meaning. Others look at them and wonder why they seem younger than their actual age. The answer usually isn't physical at all. It's connected to purpose. Purpose gives life momentum. Without that momentum, people can become emotionally stagnant even while they're still young in years. Someone in their 20s might feel completely exhausted, disconnected, indifferent about the future. Someone decades older might still carry real enthusiasm because something meaningful keeps pulling them forward. That contrast reveals something important. Simply existing and actually feeling alive are two very different things. When someone has purpose, their mind stays engaged with possibility instead of getting stuck on limitation. Purpose gives people reasons to get up, improve, contribute, explore, or push through hard periods. It doesn't erase suffering, but it changes how that suffering is experienced. Pain feels different when it's connected to something that actually matters. Purpose doesn't have to be grand or public, by the way. It doesn't need fame or recognition attached to it. For a lot of people, purpose just shows up in creating, teaching, building, understanding, helping others, raising a family, learning something new, or simply becoming more self-aware. What matters isn't the scale of the purpose, it's the sincerity behind it. People without any real sense of direction often get trapped in repetition. Days start blending together. Motivation weakens. Time keeps passing, but growth slows to a crawl. That condition tends to affect someone's whole emotional energy. They might grow more cynical, more disconnected, more overwhelmed by routine, because nothing meaningful is actually guiding their effort. Purpose changes this entire relationship with time. Instead of viewing years purely as loss, people with real meaning in their lives tend to experience those same years as development. They keep becoming, rather than simply aging. Their attention shifts toward what's still possible to discover, instead of dwelling on what's already gone. Curiosity matters here too. Purpose keeps curiosity alive, and curious people stay open to new perspectives, new skills, new ideas, new experiences. That openness creates flexibility, and emotional flexibility helps people adapt to change instead of fearing it. Since life is constantly shifting anyway, that adaptability becomes essential for holding on to real vitality. A lot of people assume youthful energy comes from simply avoiding hardship altogether, but some of the most vibrant people you'll ever meet have been through serious struggles. Their energy survived because they refused to disengage from life. They kept their interest alive. They kept searching for meaning even after disappointment. That combination creates a presence people notice. Others tend to describe that kind of person as inspiring, calm, or full of life. And while the description might sound almost mysterious, underneath it is usually just a continued connection to purpose. Somewhere inside, that person still believes something matters. Purpose shapes identity too. When someone's entire sense of worth is tied to appearance, aging can feel like a genuine threat, because every physical change gets reinterpreted as personal decline. But people who are anchored in something deeper tend to root their identity elsewhere, in contribution, understanding, growth, lived experience. As a result, aging starts feeling less like disappearing and more like expanding. Youth sustained by real purpose is nothing like youth sustained purely by appearance. One inevitably changes as circumstances shift. The other can keep going, because it comes from genuine engagement with life itself. That might be exactly why some people seem to carry a quiet brightness no matter how many years pass. Their bodies age, their responsibilities pile up, their experiences accumulate, and yet something underneath all of it stays active, not untouched by pain, but still moving, still curious, still connected to something bigger than fear or habit. People are often surprised by who you become, mostly because they're unconsciously comparing your present self to an outdated version they've been carrying in their memory. Human beings tend to freeze impressions in place. Once someone decides who you are, they often keep seeing you through that exact same lens for years afterward, even long after real change has taken place. If they knew you during a period of uncertainty, struggle, insecurity, or confusion, those qualities can get permanently attached to their mental image of you. Memory has a way of locking people into specific moments. Someone might remember you back when you lacked confidence. Someone might remember your failures more vividly than any of your growth. Others might recall the version of you who tolerated disrespect, doubted yourself constantly, or stayed quiet when you shouldn't have. They become familiar with those particular traits and quietly start expecting them to stick around forever. This creates invisible limits, not always out of cruelty, but simply out of habit. People find comfort in believing others stay the same because predictability feels safe. Change disrupts that comfort. When someone genuinely transforms, the people around them have to update their whole understanding, and that update rarely happens instantly. This is exactly why personal growth catches people off guard. You experience your own evolution slowly, day by day, year by year, with each individual change feeling small in the moment. You learn from disappointment, you build boundaries, you recover from painful experiences, you develop real self-awareness. Because you lived through every single stage of it, the whole process feels gradual to you. But to someone who wasn't there for those internal shifts, the difference can look almost sudden. They're comparing an old memory to your current reality, and that contrast is what shocks them. The person they expected to see simply doesn't exist in that same form anymore. Maybe you became calmer after years of emotional struggle. Maybe you built real confidence after repeated failure. Maybe you stopped chasing approval once you understood your own worth differently. These shifts rarely happen out in the open. Most of the real growth takes place in private, in reflection, in loneliness, in mistakes, in grief, in repeated effort, in hard decisions made alone. Other people usually only get to see the finished result. There's another layer to why people keep comparing your present self to who you used to be. Your growth can unintentionally challenge beliefs they've held onto for years. If someone assumed pain would permanently weaken you, watching you grow stronger forces them to reconsider that assumption. If they believed insecurity defined you, your newfound confidence catches them off guard. If they expected you to stay stuck, your progress unsettles the picture they'd built. Sometimes that surprise carries admiration. Sometimes it carries confusion. Occasionally it carries genuine discomfort because someone else's transformation can quietly remind people of the changes they've been putting off in their own lives. What's interesting about real growth is how often it strips away the exact qualities people once associated with your identity. Fear fades, the need for validation weakens, tolerance for unhealthy situations shifts dramatically, silence becomes something chosen deliberately instead of something uncertain and anxious. The person might look physically similar to before, and yet their whole presence feels different. Other people register that difference almost immediately. They might struggle to articulate exactly what changed and just say something like, "You seem different now." Usually what they're picking up on isn't a change in core personality, it's a change in awareness, a change in self-respect, a change in how someone relates to their own old wounds. Most people never realize just how vividly earlier versions of themselves stay alive in other people's memories. That's part of why growth can sometimes create distance. People who were attached to an earlier version of you might feel genuinely unfamiliar with who you've become. But evolving is simply part of being human. Nobody stays exactly the same across years of experience, disappointment, learning, and reflection. What's actually surprising isn't that people change. It's how often everyone around them keeps expecting them not to. And when someone finally becomes stronger, calmer, wiser, or more secure than the version people remember from years back, those observers are forced to confront something a little uncomfortable. The image they've been holding on to was always incomplete, because human beings are almost always capable of far more than the limitations other people quietly assign to them based on an earlier chapter. So maybe the real surprise isn't that you look younger, stronger, calmer, or more alive than anyone expected. Maybe the real surprise is that your life simply refused to become what everyone predicted. The years that were supposed to wear you down ended up teaching you instead. The pain that was supposed to harden you ended up deepening you instead. The silence that was supposed to isolate you ended up showing you exactly who you really are. And the struggles that could have broken you slowly built a version of yourself that almost nobody, including maybe you, thought was possible. People might look at you now and wonder how you changed so much, but they never witnessed the private battles behind it. They didn't see the moments you chose growth over bitterness, meaning over fear, self-understanding over other people's approval. Real transformation is almost never loud. It happens quietly, one hard lesson at a time, one painful ending at a time, one honest conversation with yourself at a time. And after enough time passes, people stop seeing only your age or your appearance. They see depth, they see resilience, they see peace, they see someone who simply kept becoming. Remember this. Getting older is unavoidable, but becoming calmer and more connected to who you really are is a choice you make again and again, year after year. Never be afraid of change, especially when that change brings you closer to who you actually are. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can become isn't younger, it's more whole. Thank you for sticking with this all the way through. May you keep growing in strength, peace, and self-respect, even through the hardest seasons of life. Wishing you well on whatever comes next, and may the person you become one day surprise even you.